The code is the first set of pan-European standards on responsible advertising for online gambling. The code is designed to be a coordinated sectoral initiative on responsible advertising. It establishes common pan-European standards on responsible advertising to enhance consumer protection and minor protection in particular. The code focuses on content of the advertising. Volume is not addressed, and that's not because we don't consider that volume to be an issue in some countries, but because this is not the case for every European country, unlike content regulation, for example, which is relevant for every market. The code applies to gambling operators who are members of EGBA and their contractual affiliates and advertising intermediaries, meaning brand ambassadors, influencers, or bloggers. And it covers all marketing activities in all media platforms, regardless of the technology used, and is intended to be applicable in all EU countries, the EEA countries as well, and the UK. So the code includes a long list on content moderation measures that provide how a gambling advertisement should look like or should not look like, including measures on clear information about obtaining bonuses. The code has dedicated rules for minor protection, for example, no gambling advertising during broadcasts which are dedicated to minors, no use of cartoons or animated characters that appeal to minors, etc. The code also establishes first-of-their-kind rules on social media through, for example, the innovative use of age screening tools in social media to avoid minors being targeted, or age gating the social pages of social media profiles of gambling brands to ensure that minors do not have access to them. The code also has a dedicated chapter for sponsorship arrangements, as well as rules that focus on responsible gambling advertising and the possibility of organizing responsible gambling campaigns, which should always focus on raising awareness, for example, on the risks of gambling, providing information about where players can seek help if they need to, and never include invitations to gamble. So there are four elements that make this code unique. First of all, it is the first set of pan-European self-regulatory measures on gambling advertising. The code is actually developed in the context of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which specifically encourages the use of self-regulation, including for gambling advertising. The fact that it also contains, for the first time, specific rules for social media that was not addressed in any other pre-existing code. The code also includes concrete examples on content moderation, and by that I mean that when drafting the content moderation measures, we went through the decisions of advertising authorities to take examples of language that is permitted and language that should never be in there. And finally, the code itself actually foresees the commitment to conduct monitoring and to proceed with enforcement. The code is, of course, open, and we invite other gambling operators, non-members of EGBA, to sign up to it, provided that they comply with the entirety of the measures, of course. National gambling associations, or associations that represent the media sector are also invited to endorse the code by promoting it among their members and by inviting them to sign up to it. And at this point, I'm happy to mention that we have received actually the expression of interest of other gambling companies, the support of other media associations, and while 3 national gambling associations have already committed to endorse the code. The code is a living document, and this means that it can be updated anytime in the future in order to correspond to the trends and or the technological developments that we can expect. The update can be done by EGBA and its members in collaboration, of course, with the advertising and gambling authorities. And finally, it is important also to note that the code will not replace any existing self-regulatory code, measure, or any legislation, of course. It is rather designed to complement them. Of course, monitoring, as we all know, is extremely crucial if we want to speak about effective self-regulation. And the code actually itself foresees the commitment of monitoring on a frequent basis and by an independent body. We are actually currently having discussions with our members to decide on how we want to proceed with monitoring. And this, for example, can be done by the European Advertising Standards Alliance, EASA, who also conduct a gap analysis exercise for us, for which I will speak in detail in a few minutes. Monitoring can start with a certain amount of countries and certain aspects of the code, depending on the different needs each time. To ensure the effectiveness of the initiative and to be able to promote it in a targeted way, we assigned to the European Advertising Standards Alliance to conduct a gap analysis exercise. EASA is the Brussels-based associations whose members are the regulatory advertising authorities of 25 countries, and actually ASA is one member of EASA. And it is responsible for developing and promoting and monitoring self-regulation. The gap analysis exercise allowed us to compare the code of conduct with the existing self-regulatory and legislative measures on gambling advertising among 15 selected markets that you can see in this slide. The exercise gave us actually information such as to which extent this code of conduct is stricter or more detailed than the national rules, and which are the gaps or the points of convergence on regulating gambling advertising. The self-regulatory organizations, members of EAS, also provided us with some language improvement suggestions for our code. Some of them we actually took under consideration before publishing the code, and they also gave us some suggestions for future implementation on national level. The final report of this exercise is actually very detailed and it remains confidential. However, we have published a summary of the main findings of this exercise that can be found in our website. What I can already mention is that these findings, for example, showed that the code in some aspects was found to be stricter or more detailed in some cases, especially in relation to measures that have to do with social media and minor protection. And they also showed that the code is consistent, so there is no contradiction with any current measure. And actually, it can be implemented in 9 out of the 15 countries that were tested. And finally, regarding the next steps for us, so we, as I mentioned earlier, we are now in the process of discussing monitoring and how we will conduct it together with our members. Actually, any country can be part of the monitoring exercise, irrespective of the gap analysis. We want to work in parallel for the code implementation in member states, and we want to continue promoting it among gambling operators, national associations, and media sector seeking their endorsement. And finally, we also plan to organize more presentations and webinars, maybe like this one. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions you